All right, today I want to talk about the shooting of Donovan Lewis. This happened in Columbus, Ohio on August the 30th, 2022. By now, everybody should be aware of this incident. It's making some major headlines. This was an incident where a man was found in his bed and shot by police, and it was later found that he was not armed at the time. When someone who is not armed is killed by the police, that makes it a big deal. There's a lot of information and misinformation being shared about this incident. Most importantly, or unfortunately, is from my perspective, is that they're acting like the officers just walked into this guy's house, kicked open his bedroom door, and shot him in his bed. This is very similar to the story that was going around about Breonna Taylor down in Louisville when she was shot. They said that she was laying in her bed and she was shot and killed, which that was also not true. Most people I think by now have already seen the shooting, or at least they've seen this image. This image is literally milliseconds before Mr. Lewis was killed. This incident is a big deal, and it's important to understand what happened in that split second when the officers opened the door. But in order to understand that, I think you have to be honest about what happened before that. If you watch the full-length unedited body camera video, the shooting happens at 16 minutes and 3 seconds. The officers had been there for quite a period of time. What were they doing prior to the shooting? I think one of the things that happens when you have something like this is, and I was guilty of it the first time that I watched the video, you know that there's a shooting, and that's what you want to see. So you turn on the video and you see guys walking or meandering around, not doing anything. You start to skip ahead, and then you get to the point where, oh, this guy's already been shot. So then you rewind a little bit, and that's how you get to see the shooting. And it's shocking. You know, there's a guy in his bed. He's not armed. It looks like he was just woken up. Why did the officers shoot this guy? Well, you have to actually watch what happened for the 16 minutes prior to that in order to understand what led to the shooting. That's what I want to do today. And I want to start, it's about 3 minutes and 10 seconds into the unedited body camera footage. And this is when they went and knocked on the door. This guy had warrants for domestic violence and a weapons violation. A felony weapons charge, to be exact. If the officers wanted to, they could have walked up to his door, kicked that door in, gone in, and placed him under arrest. But that's not what the officers did. They actually walked up the door and they gave it a knock. And they ended up knocking on that door for about 8 minutes. And that's kind of what I want to show you now, is how that knocking began and how the officers were acting.
Can you see anything through the window?
I can't see anything through here, and I can't see anything through there.
So when the officers walked up to the house and they decided that they were in fact going to attempt to serve this warrant, they began knocking on the door. But they were knocking on the door in kind of a friendly manner because they did not want to escalate a potentially violent situation. They had a guy who was inside. They knew he had a warrant for domestic violence. He also had a warrant for carrying a firearm illegally. So there's a good chance that you have a violent person inside who is armed with a firearm. The officers were trying to avoid a violent confrontation, so they went and they started knocking very nicely on the door. The next clip I want to show you is 10 minutes and 38 seconds into the incident. This is about 7 minutes after they began knocking, 7.5 minutes after they began knocking on the door. And this is when they start to raise their voice and make sure that the people inside know that it is in fact the police who have been knocking on the door. They stood outside this door knocking for 7 minutes. I think that is significant. If you watch the entire unedited video, that 7 minutes feels like an absolute eternity. These guys were not just rushing into this situation. So here it is where they start to raise their voice a little bit and make sure the people inside know it's the police outside.
Donovan, if you don't come to the door, I'm going to kick it in.
Mark comes back here.
If I have to come in there and get you, you're going to get tased. Come to the door and talk to me. Do it now.
Have Ricky come here and park.
Male.
Male, yeah.
Come to the door. Hands up.
4311.
So they continue to knock on the door for another 2 minutes. And then about 12 minutes into the incident is when the first people come to the door and actually walk outside. If these officers were being aggressive and heavy-handed, I would like you to consider how it is that they handle these people that choose to walk outside and greet them.
Show me your hands. Hands up. Face away from me. Face away from me. Hands up. Walk backwards to me. Who else is in here? Huh?
Oh, shit.
Okay, turn around. Turn around. Got another person sitting there on the bed. Okay, don't move. Don't move.
Chill.
Well, stop moving. Stop moving. Okay. You're just being detained real quick, okay? Who else is in here? How many people?
You sleep in this room.
Okay, relax. Stop pulling away from me.
So as you can see, the man walked out. They took him into custody. They told him that he was going to be detained. One officer even pointed out that the man who walked out had a knife in his waistband. The officers didn't freak out. They didn't kill him, for lack of a better explanation. They calmly went about their business. I'm going to fast forward a little bit once again. And this is 13 minutes and 51 seconds into the clip. They've been knocking on this door for 10 and a half minutes. They took 2 people out of the apartment and took them into custody. Now they're standing at the doorway to the house. They know that they're going to be going in, but they're going to continue to make more announcements because they want anybody that's inside to have the ability or the opportunity to surrender peacefully. And that's what you're going to see here.
So if he's in there, tell
Columbus Police, if you're inside, make yourself known. Do it now.
I don't know who's in the apartment that you're in.
We're going to send the canine in a second.
So like he said, he was threatening to send a canine into the house. Next, you'll see a canine officer who arrived on scene. He announces his presence extremely loudly. He wants to make it abundantly clear that he is on scene, that his dog is on scene. And they want to give anybody who is still in that apartment the opportunity to walk out with their hands up to end this peacefully. At this point in time, they've been knocking on the door and have not yet crossed that threshold. And it's been 11 and a half minutes.
I can't tell if it's just a closet to the right. They're saying nobody else. Columbus
Police canine unit! If you're inside, you'll send out else in this dog!
How do you not know? How'd you get in?
Come on out! Come out now!
So as you saw, not only did the canine officer announce his presence, but he had his dog announce his presence as well. So anybody that is still in that apartment is aware that the police are there, that they have a canine there, and that they're threatening to release this canine into the building. This is another tactic that police use to try to convince somebody to give up and surrender peacefully. Unfortunately, this time, Donovan chose not to do that. So the next thing that they're going to do is release the dog into the apartment, and the reaction is interesting.
Whoa!
Hands! Hands! Yeah, there's somebody back there. That dog's gonna bite you if you don't come out.
I'll move up.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you.
So at this point in time, this is approximately 12 minutes into this incident. The officers arrived on scene. They began knocking on the door. They knocked very quietly and politely. Then they started raising their voices, issuing commands to people that were inside. That initial phase took about 8 minutes. Then over the next 4 or 5 minutes, the officers announced that they were there. They had a canine announced. They had the canine bark. They had a canine go into the apartment. The canine actually barked at the door where our suspect was barricaded himself in his bedroom. And the officers were able to confirm that he was, in fact, home because he yelled at the dog through the door. This confirmed a couple of things. It confirmed that the person that they were looking for was in his bedroom. It also confirmed that he was aware the police were there and that they were there with a canine. The officers have been on scene for a little over 15 minutes at this point. They've been knocking on the door and trying to get into the apartment for about 12 minutes. Remember that the person that they're looking for has a warrant for domestic violence and for a weapons violation. This is a very dangerous and perhaps deadly combination. And every minute that goes on without him in custody, with him in his bedroom locked in there doing God knows what, makes the situation more and more dangerous for the officers. The officers finally, after 15 minutes and 45 seconds or so, approach his door and open the door. And when they open the door, this is what they see.
Hands!
Come in!
When they opened Mr. Lewis's door, they found him on his bed. He rolled towards the officer and moved his hand in that manner. The officers had less than a third of a second to decide what to do. A third of a second is something that officers have drilled into their head. This is the action beats reaction. The average person can only react within 1/3 of a second. So when you see somebody moving, you have 1/3 of a second to decide what you're going to do. The officers were searching for a man with a warrant for domestic violence and a felony weapons charge. They had been announcing their presence for 15 minutes. Once they opened the door, they announced louder. They had a dog go into the house. The dog also announced. The man acknowledged that the dog was there. Had to be aware that the police were walking up to that door. That's what's going through your head. The officers were concerned that there was a man inside the apartment who was setting up an ambush. When they opened the door and they saw him moving his hand that way, the officer who fired his weapon believed that's what was happening. There were a lot of decisions made that day that led up to what happened in that last third of a second. After thinking about it for a couple of days like I've had, I think it's fairly clear that the officer's goal was to have Donovan walk out of his bedroom, put his hands up, and surrender and be taken into custody peacefully. For some reason, Donovan chose not to do that. Donovan made a decision, and an officer made a decision. And the result is a tragedy. There's no question that what happened is an absolute tragedy. This man did not have a firearm, did not have a knife or any object that could harm the officers. But every indication leading up to that point made them believe this was, in fact, a dangerous situation. So with less than a third of a second, an officer made a decision. Now there's going to be an investigation. There's going to be a grand jury, possibly even a jury. It's up to them to decide whether or not that was the right decision. Those are going to be my thoughts for today.